We're nearing the finish line of this series that we've been in called THRIVAL, where we've really asked ourselves, what does it look like when I'm living my best life, when my relationships, when my soul is thriving? And so much of the conversations that we've been having have revolved around ourself and our inner world. What can I do, or how might I think about things so that I experience a sense of thriving? But today, I want to invite us to expand this idea outwards to how we might thrive as a collective, how we might thrive as not only this community, but as the human community, as the earth community. And when we're talking about, whether it's community or we're talking about religion or even we're talking about things like politics, really what we're talking about is how we organize ourselves as people, the systems that we create and live in. And we ask questions like, are these systems working? Are they not working? What about them is helping us? What about them is hurting us? So I want to start with a quote from Steve Jobs. If you don't know who Steve Jobs is, he was the founder of Apple. And he wrote a letter to himself, and I'm going to get into that in just a second. But what I do want to mention about Steve Jobs is when we think about the system that we live in today, right? It was in many ways influenced by the work that he did. I mean, Apple products, whether or not I don't know if you're an Apple person or an Android person, it's not a debate we need to get into today, but it's true that the technology that we have in our world today is really influencing the way that we relate to one another. So when you think of Steve Jobs, you might think of individualism. He was sort of this fearless leader archetype. You might even think of capitalism, that he founded one of the most successful businesses on the planet. And certainly if you watched any, movies or documentaries about him, you would know that he was a force, right? He was someone that intimidated people who worked for him. And yet this figure who might have been associated with those images and those ideas, he was also known, especially in the later part of his life, he was known for this spirituality. And in fact, a year before his death, he wrote this letter to himself. Actually, it's an email, of course, because it's Apple, right? You can see you can see all the info right there. And he wrote this letter to himself, and I want to read this letter. I grow little of the food I eat, and of the little I do grow, I did not breed or perfect the seeds. I do not make any of my own clothing. I speak a language I did not invent or refine. I did not discover the mathematics I use. I am protected by freedoms and laws I did not conceive of or legislate, and do not enforce or adjudicate. I am moved by music I did not create myself. When I needed medical attention, I was helpless to help myself survive. I did not invent the transistor, the microprocessor, object-oriented programming, or most of the technology I work with. I love and admire my species, living and dead, and am totally dependent on them for my life and well-being. Sent from my iPad. And this dynamic that is being spoken to here, I think this way of seeing the world is something that I would call interdependence, right? And the word independence doesn't fully capture this because, as we've already kind of thought about, independence is an illusion, right? We all need one another. And yet the word dependence also doesn't fully capture it because that system that we belong to and we're dependent on, it's also dependent on us, right? We're all part of it together. Can you really imagine that it would be possible to thrive alone in this life? I don't think so. Can you think of a moment in your life where you were thriving, where you thought you were thriving, that didn't involve anyone or anything else, right? Sure, we have experiences in our life where, whether it's through spiritual growth and development, the inner work that we do, sure, we do that on our own, right? And some of that work is not reliant on other people, specifically their validation. But if you think about how you got there, right, the journey that you take, it always involves others, right? Think of the most isolated thing you could do. Like imagine yourself meditating on a mountaintop. You're like, there's no one around. This is all me. Think about how you got there, right? It always involves other people. Or as the Dalai Lama says, things are highly interdependent. The very concepts of we and they are becoming irrelevant. War is out of date because our neighbors are part of ourselves. I love what he says. Things are highly interdependent, not things become highly interdependent. Because friends, it's not something that we can do. It's something that we remember. It's already happening. It's always around us. It's the truth of our reality. We become conscious of it. For example, have any of you done any breathing lately? Anyone? Okay. Or, have you eaten in the last month? Anyone? Someone's in here is like, I want a 40-day fast, so that doesn't count. But if you've been social recently, right, all of these things are indicators that you are participating in an interdependent system. So we just simply recognize what already is. Martin Luther King gave this beautiful sermon on Christmas Day about peace on earth, and it included this wonderful section on interrelatedness. He says, before you finish eating breakfast in the morning, you've depended on more than half the world. This is the way our universe is structured. It is its interrelated quality. We aren't going to have peace on earth until we recognize this basic fact of the interrelated structure of all reality. And we use words like recognize or remember. And many of you know who were here for our re-series, I love re-words. And to recognize, to remember, cognition, mind, right? Memory, mind. These words mean to think again, to mind again, to bring back to mind. And, we've also talked about the fact that the word religion, in its most basic etymology, its most basic construction of the word, means to reconnect. For that ligio part of the word is the same as the word ligament, to connect. So to participate in religion at its most basic form is to remember one's connections to the whole. And often, friends, those moments where we have that recognition, we have that remembrance of our connectedness with everything, we might call that a religious or a spiritual experience. And so I wonder, from that perspective, is community anything that we is community coming together, right? Or is it a remembrance that we are already connected? We are already together. Is community an act of connecting, or is it a remembrance that we already have a myriad of connections, some of which we see, some of which we don't? Is spirituality anything that we do, or is it just a remembrance of what already is true? And of course, we will forget. That's part of life. It's a rhythm of life, remembering, forgetting, remembering, forgetting. And I think that that's okay. It's not this inherent flaw in our human condition. It's just a reality that we can embrace and we can practice, right? We can practice remembering, right? I don't think that the goal is to never forget. Like, for example, think about your favorite basketball player, like the person you think is the best basketball player of all time. And again, I know my audience, so I'm trying to, I know that we're a basketball town, so think about the person that you think is the greatest basketball player of all time. Did they never miss a shot, right? Do they never have a bad game? No, it's that they adjust, right? They're present with whatever situation they're handed. They know how to adjust. They know how to be in that moment. I'm not going to speak on this any further because I'm not a sports person, so I'm out of my depth here, okay? But here's the reality. Knowing that we will forget, knowing that we will lose that sense of interdependence, it's helpful to ask, what does it look like when I've lost that, right? What does it look like when the shot's not going in? Okay, I'll stop, I promise. So I want to just walk through a couple of frameworks of ways that we might recognize, if I'm doing that, then it might mean that I've lost, for a moment, I've forgotten my sense of interdependence and interconnection, right? And the first thing, or the first framework that I want to refer to is something called lifeboat theory. Imagine a lifeboat like that, okay? Imagine you're on a cruise, right? How many of you have been on a cruise? A lot of you, okay. I lived on a cruise very briefly. So I was I was very familiar with how the lifeboats worked, okay? And the thing, so there's this idea called lifeboat theory, and it's this concept where imagine that you're on this cruise, okay, and God forbid the ship goes down, and everyone's piling in to these different lifeboats, and you are fortunate enough, you get into a lifeboat, and you're thinking, oh, okay, I'm safe, and you find out that the lifeboat is made for 10 people, and there are 11 of you in the lifeboat, okay? Now, the reality is just how we are as human beings, and we get in these scary, difficult situations. What probably would be going through your head at that point is, I need to prove my worth. Okay, I need to make sure that I am valuable enough to be kept on this lifeboat. And what's interesting is, it may not be that you need to be the number one most valuable person in that lifeboat. You just want to be in the top 10, okay? As long as you're not number 11. Now, you might be thinking, like, what does this have to do with life? Here's the reality, friends. Life often ends up looking like the lifeboat, right? Whether it's our careers, oftentimes even our relationships, certainly the way the world is structured. That in order to feel safe, sometimes it depends on us putting other people down or creating a sense of separation from others. How many of you have, in your career, have been in a situation where someone just threw you under the bus, right? No, what? Nobody? Oh my goodness, that sounds amazing. Tell me about this life that you've been living. Incredible. Well, anyway, for the few of you that have actually experienced this dynamic of being thrown under the bus before, you can tell the rest of everyone what it's like. But what you might have done, you might have looked back at this situation. Okay, maybe let's take it outside of career. Have you ever been thrown under the bus for anything ever in your life, right? So what you might have noticed as you reflected on this situation is, wow, why did the person even do that? Sometimes it's like it didn't even do anything for them. It seems just out of the blue. And then you realize, wow, maybe they felt safer by putting me down because it made them feel more secure in their position. See, this is why we other people, right? This is tribalism at its most clear, that we feel safe when we put people on the outside, that we feel more secure about being in the in-group when we push people into the out-group. We feel safe in our position when we put other people down. This is lifeboat theory. And yet, friends, this is when we've strayed from our sense of interdependence. Because if we thought of the planet as a lifeboat, the reality is there is room and there is enough for everyone, but we just need to be aware and come back to that sense of interdependence. The second framework, friends, is this tendency, I know I feel it, it's this tendency to want to go it alone in life, or at least to value your own understanding, your own decision-making, your own choices over anyone else's, okay? Now, I've said this before, but I'll say it again. How many of us hate group projects, okay? I think group projects are the school systems have a lot of issues to begin with. I think group projects is the worst thing. I don't know. I can't do it. And look, I know I've said this before, but it's the soapbox that I'll get on from time and time again. Because, you want a good grade, and you're always going to be sort of affected by the person who cares the least, right? That will be the least common denominator. But here's the reality, friends. Life is also, just like life can be like the lifeboat, life is also a group project, right? Because we're all in this together. We are, whether we like it or not. And when I thought about my resistance to group projects, I began to look at myself and go, hey, maybe this is also how I'm showing up in life. Do I overvalue my perspective, right? Do I think that I see things better than anyone else, right? Do I think that my decisions are better than anyone else's? And so I began to question that. And it led me to this quote by the great spiritual teacher Krishnamurti, who was alive in the 20th century. And he says this: action has meaning only in relationship. And without understanding relationship, action on any level will only breed conflict. The understanding of relationship is infinitely more important than the search for any plan of action. Now, I know he's speaking in pretty grandiose terms, but I think it's really important for us to remember that really any action that we take is going to live within this dynamic of interdependence, right? That everything we do affects someone else. And if we make these choices and we move boldly ahead in life without taking into account the relationships that we have, the connections that we have, the interdependencies that we have, then, like he says, we end up only adding to the conflict of the world. So maybe it's important to take a step back and process and think about our relationships and how that we belong to something larger than ourselves when we move forward in life. When I was young and I was a kid, I used to play video games, and particularly I played a type of video game called a role-playing game. And if you don't know what a role-playing game is, there you go, I got some laughs out there. Someone knows. If you don't know what a role-playing game is, then I want to just flash back to like the 80s, because then in that time, the best example would be something like Dungeons and Dragons, okay? So I'm appealing to my 80s people out there. But the idea behind a role-playing game, most often, you would create your own character, and the character that you would create, you would have the ability to kind of decide the attributes of that character. You'd be given like a limited amount of points, and you'd think like, okay, this much strength and this much intelligence and this much, right? And you would kind of go along and you would create a character a certain way. And I realized that like, as human beings, we come into this world with a particular set of intelligences and strengths. And then, of course, as we live in and we move forward in life, we get to choose which ones we want to develop and which ones we want to grow. But it made me think, in life, we're all kind of playing our own little role-playing game. And so, since I can't speak for anyone else, I thought I would share with you what I think my character is. So, this is me as I'm creating a character. Let's make it a little more video gamey. There you go. So, I'm pretty proud of my gift giving. Okay, I think I'm a pretty good gift giver. So I rated myself pretty highly there. I'm not the best cook. Pretty low. I can not burn the house down. Pickleball, I'm about 50-50 because, I think I'm good, but then I play people who are actually good and I get destroyed. Next, trivia. Useless trivia is my number one. I'm the king of terrible, pointless, useless trivia. Lastly, diving. I cannot dive, okay? I literally cannot dive into a pool. So if you need me to be a part of your team and you need diving to happen, I'm not the person. Don't pick me. So this is how I've sort of rated myself. And again, I'm being facetious, but of course, in reality, we all have a sort of breakdown of the strengths and weaknesses that we bring to the table. I can't look at this anymore. Get out of here, okay? We all are unique. We all bring different things to the table. And what if that goal and that understanding of interdependence is really about surrounding ourselves with other perspectives, other ways of doing things? Sometimes one of the avenues that is the most confronting and yet the most helpful for us to realize this is in our closest relationships. Maybe it's a spouse or your partner, because you came into this world and you grew and you developed a certain way of doing things. And they came into this world with a completely different way of doing things. And you come together, right? And at its most difficult, you're just trying to convince them why your side is right. But at its best, you are opened up to an entirely new way of seeing the world and an entirely new way of doing things that can benefit you. It can complete the areas of your own personal character breakdown that might be incomplete. Right? And even if we look at that example of a role-playing game, usually the goal was not to try to do everything on your own, but to join a team or something called a party with which you would find others that could complete those areas for you, right? And so it's about, instead of overvaluing our own perspective, bringing in and sharing and enjoying the variety of perspectives that we can experience in life. But all of that is all good and fine, and yet it's really difficult to live that out if the society that we live in isn't structured that way, isn't encouraging of us to live in that way. And so for this third framework, this third way of recognizing when we've walked away from interdependence, for lack of a better term, the word that I'm going to use is hoarding, that there is this dynamic of hoarding in our world. See, it's something that is very ancient, and yet is perhaps the most pronounced in our world today. And it's this dynamic, we all know it, where a very select few have a lot of resources and a lot of wealth, right? And many people have very little, right? So there's a few that have a lot and a lot that have very little. In essence, it's a pyramid scheme, right? And I think, sometimes we're on Facebook and we see someone who's like, hey, I'm starting a business. And you're like, hey, that's a pyramid scheme. And we think we're so smart when we can discover a pyramid scheme. We're like, my friend fell into it and I didn't fall into it, right? But the reality is that our economic system and the world at large, in some ways, is structured that way, right? We have people, and the rich are getting richer, and the poor are getting poorer, and that's just something that we see. And it's nothing new. It's been going on for thousands and thousands of years. But along, you didn't hear that, but I don't even know. I'm like, do I even share that? Anyway, moving on. It's been going on for thousands and thousands of years, and alongside this dynamic that's been present in the ancient world has been this evolving understanding of how we can live in a different way, right? How we can operate outside of that system, how we can turn that pyramid into more of a circle where everyone belongs, everyone has enough. It's like a table, right? And so we see in our spiritual traditions this evolving understanding about how to organize in a way which all can have what they need, right? And so just for today's sake, I'm going to look at the Judeo-Christian tradition and look at the dynamic that shows up both in the Old and the New Testament. I'm going to start with Leviticus. Now, who here likes the book of Leviticus, right? It's pretty much no one's favorite book in the Bible, we think of Leviticus as full of all these laws and rules that seemingly have no application for our world today, some of which are barbaric and seem really, divorced from the current set of values that many of us hold. And yet we also can see that in Leviticus there was an attempt to begin to point towards a way of being in which everyone might be taken care of. Leviticus 23:22, when you harvest the crops of your land, do not harvest the grain along the edges of your fields, and do not pick up what the harvesters drop. Leave it for the poor and the foreigners living among you. Now, of course, this verse probably sits alongside all kinds of verses that we no longer resonate with, that we've left in the past. And yet, this verse, in some ways, we have yet to fully grasp and live into what it's pointing to. It's an attempt to point to a new way of organizing ourselves together. So this is ancient world, right? Old Testament. Let's then fast forward to the New Testament, to the early church after Jesus' death, right? We have in the book of Acts the early church, and these small communities have begun to form around the way of Jesus. And of course, Jesus was taking some of this teaching and understanding from the Old Testament and bringing it forward, right? Pushing it forward. And so in Acts 4:32 through 35, we see this: the whole congregation of believers was united as one heart, one mind. They didn't even claim ownership of their own possessions. No one said, that's mine, you can't have it. They shared everything. And so it turned out that not a person among them was needy. Those who owned fields or houses sold them. It's the next one over. Maybe I didn't put it in there. I'll keep going. Those who owned fields or houses sold them and brought the price of the sale to the apostles and made an offering of it. The apostles then distributed according to each person's need. So chart this progression, right, from Leviticus to Acts, from the Old Testament to the New Testament, across 1,000 years, right? From, hey, can we make sure that those who maybe don't look like you or those who are in a different socioeconomic bracket as you, maybe we can make sure those people are still taken care of? And in fact, would you take some responsibility for that? And we see that move all the way to, hey, what if you organized yourself in an entirely different way, where everyone was taken care of, where everyone had enough? See, friends, what we see is an expansion of consciousness over time. And when we chart this expansion, what we're seeing is a greater understanding of this dynamic that we're calling interdependence. When we don't live from this place of interdependence, we are resisting the flow of consciousness. We are resisting this expansion of love throughout our world, really throughout the cosmos. So how, friends, are we supposed to live from that place of interdependence? How are we supposed to engage this way of being? Well, from my perspective, the most direct way that we can practice and we can model this way of being is in community, right? We had a series on community a couple months back where we really looked at this idea that it's about what we all bring, right? It's not about just what a couple people decide that a community is going to be. It's how we all show up in community, all the vulnerability that we bring, right? A friend of mine calls it community-owned community, right? We either do it or we don't, he says, right? We either are fully operating from this place where the community is interdependent within itself, or we're not. We're just simply we are or we aren't, you know? And I'm glad that we are Aldea and not Aldea by Amazon. But imagine though, right? Like Prime members, you get coffee. Everyone else, tea only, you know? The community can't be owned by me. It can't be owned by the leadership team or the staff, right? It only works if we all take our part and our responsibility. And this is the beauty of the fact that Aldea means village. I love the fact that this is the name that we've organized ourselves under. Because sometimes, you know, that word like church, we instantly brought to mind power structures and hierarchy, or, you know, things like organizations can be difficult for us, right? But when we think about a village, we think about a community where everyone plays a role. So I want you to do me a favor. For just a minute, imagine in your head when you think of a village, like in the most fantastic, idyllic sense, right? Like maybe it's something out of The Sound of Music, or it's Whoville from The Grinch, right? Like I want you to just do me a favor. Think of your most fairy tale village for a second. It's probably that there's, you know, these bunch of these cute little buildings everywhere, right? And there's a baker and a builder and a farmer and a mayor and a painter and a teacher, right? Every person brings their unique value. And I wonder if we saw Aldea the same way. If you saw yourself in that way, that you hold a value that no one else does. Sometimes it can be difficult and scary to think about further investing ourselves in a community because we fear that we're going to lose our sense of individuality. And yet, what I find is, from this perspective, the deeper that we give ourselves to relationship and to community, the more we find our individuality, the more we are supported to do the thing that only we can do, to bring the thing that only we can bring. That's true here in this community, but it's also true in life. There is a value that only you can bring. And yet what's beautiful, maybe even paradoxical about that, is that the village benefits, of course, because of its interdependency, but you also benefit because the sharing of a gift that you want to give, that's a gift in and of itself. How many of you have felt that, you know, especially when your career, your passion aligned in a particular way, that doing the thing that you love to do was just as much a gift for you as it was for anyone else, right? Sometimes people will come up to me after a Sunday and they'll thank me for the message. And I'm like, in all seriousness, no, thank you for listening. Like, I needed to get that out, okay? I appreciate that. Sharing your gift is a gift. And I've seen it time and time again in this community. So many of you have given so much. And I just want to give a couple of examples of some really specific things. You know, Dave Archer is here in this. We'll get to that in a second. You know, a community member named Dave Archer is here, and he is a carpenter, right? Hasn't always been a carpenter, but more recently he's become a carpenter. And we were really excited about this idea of having a lending library. And we thought, hey, wouldn't it be amazing if we had something built from within our own community, you know? And the reality is, it wasn't like a bunch of you were like, hey, I have carpentry skills. Can I build something for you, right? So we talked to Dave, and it was just an amazing thing of he was operating out of his gifts, and it was a need of the community. Helga started the oneness group, okay? Her passion is to create a small group around non-duality and reflecting on life from the perspective of oneness. Again, I don't think there was a lot of you fighting over the opportunity to be the oneness. You know, it was specific to Helga and her gifts, right? Arlene, she shared earlier about how her being a newcomer drove her to want to create a space and sort of be a shepherd for the newcomers here, right? So many of you have unique gifts, right? There's Jill's here today. Jill has a very incredible talent and a creativity regarding something that I don't know how all of you feel, but she loves spreadsheets. Okay, and again, it wasn't like a lot of you were coming to offer your spreadsheet skills, but she creates these beautiful spreadsheets, and she's been able to take this data and bring it to the leadership team, and it's been so incredibly helpful for us, right? But again, it was her operating out of her unique passions and gifts, right? Some of you bake some incredible things, and you bring them for us all to enjoy. Or we just brought on Mary May as our kids director. Again, I know that there was none of you in here who were begging us to be the kids director, okay? But she loves kids. That's what she does. It's an amazing thing, right? Everyone finds their place in the village, okay? And yet, I do want to take a second and really acknowledge for those of you who are in this place today, and maybe Aldea is not your home. It's not a place you regularly attend. Maybe you're new to Aldea and you're just kind of just beginning to dip your feet in the idea of, being more involved. And I just want to thank you for, being here. And I want you to know that you don't need to try to figure anything out today. I just want you to think for your own life, in your own villages. We're all part of villages beyond this place. In your village, I just want you to think about how you might show up and how you might bring more to the villages in your life, right? And of course, if you are a part of this community, I definitely want to invite you to think about that, because no village survives, and certainly no village thrives, without recognizing and living out of its interdependence. Just as no body will experience health if it isn't functioning as a community, right? If it isn't coherent among itself. Like, imagine if one day your brain was like, you know what? I'm the smartest organ, obviously. I don't need anyone else, okay? And then the heart's like, don't you need some blood? I'm the one that pumps all that blood. And the brain's like, okay, just me and the heart. That's it. Well, and then your lungs are like, wait, you need oxygen to function as well. And the brain's like, okay, fine. Heart and lungs, we can do that. And then your digestive system is like, but you need nutrients to actually help you do all that thinking. Your brain's like, all right, fine, I get it. Forget it. We need each other. We all need to be a part of the system together. And so what I want to do, I want to close our time with a little bit of response. You might have noticed that there are sticky notes at every seat. You've probably been waiting 45 minutes to figure out what these sticky notes are for. Okay, here's the deal. We added a new station to the lobby. You can put that slide up, and this new station basically just has some of the different volunteer opportunities. And so at any point today, or just at any point moving forward in the future, if you ever find yourself wanting to get involved with one of the teams that we have here at Aldea, all you got to do is take a sticky note and just place it anywhere in that square, right? And there you go, just like that. But I also want to create a larger invitation. See, for so many of you, the thing that you have as your gift that only you can give isn't necessarily contained within the teams that we currently have, right? Maybe some of you write poetry. You're thinking, how can I share my poetry? Or maybe you're thinking, like, I'm really handy with tools. I'd love to offer that. There are so many different ways that so many of you can offer yourself to the interdependent community around you. And so if that's you, I want to encourage you to think outside of the box. You can place your sticky note anywhere around the box. Now, if you're placing your sticky note on the inside of a box, all you need to do is write your name and your email, and we'll contact you. If you're writing your sticky note outside of the box, you'll also want to add a little bit of a specific about what it is that you do. So that's going to be a little bit of a response time. But before we get into that, I just want to say one thing, right? If you are here today and you're like, I'm not really feeling, a deep desire to like get involved in a particular team, or I don't even know what my quote unquote gift is yet. I just want to remind you of something. I want to share this quote from author Adrienne Marie Brown. She says, "Do you already know that your existence, who and how you are, is in and of itself a contribution to the people and place around you? Not after or because you do some particular thing, but simply the miracle of your life." Friends, if nothing else today, I want you to know that you being here, you participating in community is a gift. And if nothing else comes to mind, I simply want to invite you over this next couple of minutes to write down what it is that you bring to the villages in your life. Maybe it's your humor, right? Maybe you have advice that people come to you for. Maybe it's your unique perspective or your joy. If nothing else, just think about your contribution to your village in your world. However, if you are inspired to think about something you do want to offer to this particular community, whether it's a team or it's something outside of the box, I want to give you an opportunity just to write that down over the next couple of minutes. We're just going to play a video that'll give you a second to think and respond. I want to close today by sharing a quote from Albert Einstein. A human being is a part of the whole, called by us universe. A part limited in time and space. They experience themselves, their thoughts and feeling as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of their consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature and its beauty. Friends, when we think and we talk about interdependence, I think what we are really talking about is this expansion of consciousness, right? As Einstein says, a widening of our circle of compassion. And in this sense, it's really just another name for love, right? It's another name for life. It's another name for relaxing into this shared human experience that we're all a part of. So may we move forward with some appreciation for our interdependence, right? With some gratitude for our interdependence. Though we will forget, may we choose to engage in the practices that bring us back to that place of remembrance and recognition.